compensation payments. Officials decided to go ahead with the demolition anyway. For context, in China, the Chinese Communist Party is the sole owner of all land, meaning to those who were killed there during World War II. In all, some 1.1 million people were killed at the vast complex before it was liberated by Soviet troops on January 27, 1945. Today, the site stands as one of the world's most recognized symbol of evil that has been a site of pilgrimage for millions.
On this take on the Great Reset, and they consented to write. And over the course of 2 years, I enlisted them. I worked out what they were going to talk about. I edited their pieces, and now we're publishing finally. But it takes about like with a movie, from start to finish, if you're lucky, it takes a minimum of 2 years. So here we are. The most important thing about this book, I think, is that people need to understand how variegated this threat is. It's not just Klaus Schwab in a German accent living inside an extinct volcano at the top of Switzerland. It's insidious, and as with any totalitarian movement, communism or anything else, it sticks its tentacles into everything. And it's always done in the guise of it's for your own good. It's for your own good, comrade, right? I always add comrade to it because that's really what they mean. And I hope this book gives everybody who's interested in this subject tools to combat it. And that's our launch. It's the first salvo in what we hope will be an international movement against the Great Reset. And our writers come from basically the Anglosphere. So the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand. And with a couple of exceptions, we have one Italian writer who's very, very good on the whole notion of shareholder and stakeholder capitalism. And now, like any book, it's like your child. Once they grow up and go away to college, they're on their own. So we'll see what happens. And they rolled it back a little bit, but probably not. I'm glad to see people closing their PayPal accounts. You can't put up with this. Does Bezos have power? He can shut anything down he wants. He can end the book industry tomorrow if he feels like it. We all of us who write in a controversial way or even an analytical way are used to getting troll attacks on our books so that they deliberately try to drive down your star rating because they know that at a certain point Amazon won't plug your book if it's below, say, 3. They had some metric. It may have changed. So you're fighting that constantly. And you don't think Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, who's now at Meta, who wants Meta to be actually an entire alternate world in which they'll control what we do here in this matrix-like simulacrum of life. They're not kidding, and they have the money to do it. I mean, the amount of wealth that they've piled up is stupefying. No Roman emperor could ever have that much money. So it's kind of fun to see Elon Musk driving them crazy just because he's a wild card who doesn't conform to their blinkered sort of Soviet gulag way of thinking. You have nothing to do but cause trouble.
And maybe that's a good way of explaining it. It is kind of this like wealthy people who are essentially living on like welfare, essentially familial welfare.
When you don't have to earn a living, you can do other things, and you can become a drug addict. You can become a bum. You know, so many of the Brits in the 19th century, they didn't know what to do with the inherited wealth, so they just became sort of troublemakers.
And we do see that with communism. Now, getting into the idea of what these groups are doing, especially the World Economic Forum, and they're trying to remake humanity. If you get into their writings, it's very similar to what Marx talked about in Das Kapital, this idea of recreating the world in man's image.
Yes.
That remaking everything, not just economic systems, but down to like re-engineering plants and human DNA. Like Marx got into this idea of re-engineering humanity down to the very core of everything.
Correct.
And we see them doing it now.
Well, you know, there was the thing called the New Soviet Man, who was it's a perversion of Christianity. It's what effectively Marxism is. Remember, Marx was from a long line of rabbis who converted to Christianity, not for any religious reasons, but because German Jews would prosper more if they were Lutherans. So you saw this happen constantly. Felix Mendelssohn his grandfather was Orthodox Jewish and changed his religious affiliation in order to give his kids a chance at success. So Marx is the same way. So he rejected his rabbinical background. But he still, like a lot of religious zealots, has this idea that we can transform the nature of man. And Rousseau starts it, of course, with his own ideas about, we're born free, but everywhere mankind is in chains. That's the opening line of the book. And then
in March of 2017, Oleg Deripaska was texting his pal, and that's not my verbiage. You can see it in the text messages, how they're banding about being such good friends and whatnot. They are talking very specifically about Warner setting up a meeting with Oleg Deripaska himself. And the rest of the text message chain talks about the material that Christopher Steele can bring to the table, how it's going to be bad for the Democratic Party. And these are text messages that are just kind of explosive, in my opinion, that the Senate Intel Committee put out a statement saying, Senator Warner disclosed this to us, these text messages, we basically find no there there, to borrow some verbiage that's in the parlance right now. And my opinion is these questions need to be revisited. And we haven't even gotten to Charles McGonigal. We'll get there. We now have these text messages that show unequivocally that a sitting senator was texting the attorney for a Russian aluminum magnate who would become criminally sanctioned and later charged for violating those sanctions. That same attorney was trying to set up a conversation with Christopher Steele himself back in 2018. And so those questions need to be answered again.
In other words, like why were these conversations? Why were these attempts being made? What were these conversations about, and so forth? That's
and why was he entertaining them in the political nature that these text messages were fashioned? Talking about how it's how this is going to harm the Democratic Party and the DNC, and how this attorney literally said, "Oh, Mr. Warner, you're still my favorite senator," in one of the text messages. How is that we can just let that go? We can't. But we haven't even gotten to Charles McGonigal yet, and that's the crazy part. McGonigal was the head of the counterintelligence program at the largest FBI field office in the world. So he was literally the #1 counter-intel guy outside of Washington, D.C. headquarters for the FBI. That's a pretty senior post, Jan. I mean, this guy, it's been publicly reported, had worked on the East Africa embassy bombings, had worked on World Trade, had worked on other massive national security cases, had worked on a lot of matters inside and outside of Russia related to Russian activities. And what most people don't know is that he and Peter Strzok were buddies, and they were running bits of the Russiagate investigation together. So now we have the entry of Charles McGonigal in 2017, circa 2017-2018, who we now know it's confirmed that he was actively working on the Carter Page investigation and the Carter Page FISA. And so why is this guy important? Well, it turns out Oleg Deripaska would go on to pay Charles McGonigal $250,000 to basically launder money and continue his sanctions violation program. They have now charged Charles McGonigal with a felony, I think at least one count, if not 2 counts, a conspiracy, a money laundering count, and another substantive count I can't recall, but we can put the indictment up, which has finally been unsealed for our audience. The indictment says we are charging this individual with criminal activity that began in 2017, Jan, when Charles McGonigal was still the highest-ranking CI employee of the FBI in the New York City field office, who was working on the Russiagate investigation, who was getting courted then by Oleg Deripaska, whose attorney was in touch with Mark Warner about Christopher Steele and about Oleg Deripaska. So these aren't coincidences, Jan, and the timing of the release of this indictment. As I said, as a former federal prosecutor, I think most of our audience know this, but when they say unseal an indictment, all that means is they had charged this individual some time ago. But they seal it because normally what happens is there's a investigatory purpose behind that. Say you don't want someone to flee the jurisdiction. Say you have a conspiracy case you're building. There's other co-defendants, because once you make an indictment public, everybody finds out about it. So, when I used to run these types of large terrorism prosecutions, we would sometimes seal them. Sometimes you seal them for 6, 7, 8 months, up to a year, sometimes longer. Why did the DOJ wait so long to unseal this indictment until this week? Literally, this week in 2023 for criminal activity that began in 2017? That's a question that Merrick Garland has to answer for the American people. And he cannot be hide behind, oh, this is an ongoing criminal investigation. As I've always said, there are no coincidences in the United States government when it comes to this type of activity.
I have to ask in-depth understanding of the realities of U.S. foreign policy and so forth. And he's writing to his friend Devin Archer. Okay, you're laughing, but so I mean, what's your reaction to this?
You're right. I'm laughing only because we've gone so far beyond absurd and criminal that the only place to set your mind at some points is to laugh at it, because our government won't even take it seriously. And where my mind's at, look, in the last episode, I think you and I did a great job covering the document scandal itself and the two-tier system of justice, and how we have been saying all along that more and more and more documents at more and more locations are going to be found. And that happens to be the case, and I still think there's going to be even more found. And not just at Pence's house. I think probably you're going to hear at some point soon President Obama's going to say, hey, there's an inadvertent filing of a classified document in some warehouse of papers he took with him when he left. Because I think everybody's doing their due diligence right now, because it's kind of spreading like wildfire. But the focal point of this conversation is that document that you cited. And it wasn't an actual government document, right, with the traditional classified markings from the FBI or CIA or DOD saying X, Y, and Z about the Ukraine and Russia or the CCP or what have you, right?
Just a casual email.
Just a casual email. But that doesn't mean there wasn't a theft of classified information. All someone has to do is look at classified information and write a summary of it, and that is a theft of classified information. It's a mishandling of classified information.
But just to be clear, we don't know that that's what happened here.
Well, I don't know, because I haven't had access to the underlying documents. But what I will tell you is, from my experience in classified information from being the Deputy Director of National Intelligence, the information and the bulleted information specifically in that email is information, in my opinion, that could only have come from a classified source and classified document. It's not like Hunter Biden had access to that style and depth and detail of information as it relates to the Ukraine. There's no way Hunter Biden, who has never worked in government, as far as I can tell, after he got discharged from the Navy, he didn't have a security clearance. He had no, as far as I know, agreement or arrangement with the United States government to go do this work on their behalf. So we now know, of course, that there was the pay for play over there. There was the firing of the Ukrainian prosecutor, and that Joe Biden, when he was vice president, went over there and said, if this guy's not fired, literally, I'm going to take our U.S. money and leave. And he was fired within hours. So the questions that have to be asked are not just what we talked about in the document, but does that document relate to the pay for play? Does it relate to the advisory contracts that Hunter Biden engaged with the Ukraine and their companies and their subsidiaries to get paid in upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 a month? That's another separate issue, because that's the underlying crime is the mishandling and theft of classified information. But if you used it to commit a conspiracy or crime and illegality, that's another crime. And so for me, you and I both know Miranda. She does great work. And this find is really one that allows us to take a document and hold it up to the world and say, look, we can point to this. While we can't tell you with certainty that everything in this document is, or at one time was classified, a lot of professionals like myself are commenting on the specificity in that document to say, there's no way it wasn't.
So Miranda's point was basically that this email was just really out of character. This was not in Hunter's normal style, which he had become incredibly familiar with. It just looked something very out of place, something that was, copying information that came from somewhere else.
And Jan, where did this email come from? Hunter Biden's laptop. This document has been known to the FBI for years. So what do? That, in my opinion, and I think it'll come out later, again, I've said this repeatedly, that's the origination of the President Biden document scandal investigation involving classified information. Because when an investigator sees that type of information, what you're supposed to do, what you must do is say, what are the origination documents that this information was based in and how did he get it? And when you think Hunter Biden, you immediately think his dad, former United States Senator, former Vice President, a sitting president. Of course he had access to classified information. So what do? You start going around and pulling threads. And you say, okay, where was that document? Where's that memo that Hunter wrote found? Specifically, what was the date and time? Where was Hunter living at that time? Let's go check out that location. Issue search warrants. I mean, if we were doing this in the normal course, not this DOJ, not this FBI, not these government gangsters, but the normal course of a uniform system of justice, that's what you do. One question they just can't answer. Where did Hunter Biden get that information?
Basically,
an unprecedented period of economic turmoil. The economy is unstable, our government is in shambles, and the global war on energy